Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons connected to new releases and where we enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of the Spider-Man Brand New Day Movie Marathon and part of the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, where we are watching one movie every week as we prepare for the release of Spider-Man Brand New Day in July 2026 and Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today we are discussing The Amazing Spider-Man, released in 2012 and directed by Mark Webb. This is a reboot of the Spider-Man franchise after the poor reception of Spider-Man 3. This was also done so that Sony Pictures, who owns the rights not only to the film productions of Spider-Man, but Sony owns the character of Spider-Man, and their contract says that they need to be in production of a Spider-Man movie within a certain period of time. So they decided to reboot the franchise in order to keep the rights from reverting back to Marvel. Overall, I thought that I disliked this movie when I watched it when it first came out, and I think one or two times since then, the negatives outweighed the positives. But as I'm rewatching The Amazing Spider-Man for the Brand New Day and Doomsday movie marathons, I'm kind of looking at it through a different lens, and I realized this time that the positives for me actually do outweigh the negatives, even though there is a negative that's very large. But if you can get past that one, the positives are actually pretty strong. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but overall skewing positive now with this rewatch. For positives, there is the action and the web swinging, which does have some fresh perspectives compared to the previous Spider-Man trilogy. The casting of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy and also their chemistry and relationship, which is very strong. The overall plot and where they take things with this universe and this version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and the visual effects, which are very, very good. And then for negatives, the fact that this is a reboot just skews towards the negative side, and we'll get into that. And then the score here by James Horner is not necessarily bad, but I thought the scores in the Spider-Man trilogy were very strong, and this one just doesn't measure up to the same degree. So I'm calling that a negative here, even though the score itself isn't bad, it's just not memorable. Spoiler warning for The Amazing Spider-Man. So first are the action scenes and the web swinging scenes. So we have seen Spider-Man swinging through the city of New York for 3 movies now, but here in The Amazing Spider-Man, in this new version, Mark Webb brings something very unique. Side note, I think it's hilarious to have a Spider-Man movie directed by somebody named Mark Webb. And in this movie, we get some first-person web swinging, and it's really fun. There are scenes where it cuts to Peter Parker's point of view, and so then the camera is swinging through the city, and then we see the arms kind of come in and shoot the webs. It's very unique, and it's a really cool style. We also get Andrew Garfield, who plays Spider-Man and Peter Parker, hooting and hollering and having a blast as he's doing the first-person web swinging, and it's really unique and quite a fresh perspective. And then the action scenes are well done. You do expect that in a Spider-Man movie, but they didn't disappoint, and I think Andrew Garfield's physicality plays into that, especially as he's fighting the Lizard, which is just a really huge opponent compared to the small and wiry Peter Parker. Is a good contrast, and I think a lot of the fight scenes and action scenes represent that well, so that's a positive. Next, we have the casting of Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker. So in this rebooted version, we needed a new Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and so Sony decided to cast Andrew Garfield. I think he's a very strong actor, independent of these movies. He's just a very gifted performer, and so I think casting him in this is terrific. And then on top of that, we get Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. I think it was smart to veer away from the Mary Jane Watson character and go for Gwen Stacy, who's a love interest from the comics. And Emma Stone is also a very strong actor, so the two of them by themselves are going to do a great job, but then their chemistry is off the charts. And Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst did have a romance off screen, which is interesting in its own sense. And Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone also had a romance off screen, so that all does play into it. But the chemistry on screen between Peter and Gwen is really significant. It's very believable, and you root for them. You root for them individually as characters, and you root for them together as a couple. even though they have this incredible issue where he's got a secret identity as a superhero that puts him in danger, and then her father is the police captain or whatever, and so there's some conflict there. Very interesting character dynamics, but I thought the casting was really, really good there. And I do think my hot take is that it's really hard to compare Tobey Maguire's version and Andrew Garfield's version. And I'm not really sold on Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker. To be honest, I thought that they took some liberties there with the Peter Parker side of the character that I didn't love. But I do think he's a very strong Spider-Man. When he gets the mask and the costume on, it is quite strong, um, compared to Tobey Maguire's as well. But I digress. I think as an overall positive, Peter and Gwen and their relationship and chemistry is one of the highest positives for this movie. Next, the overall plot of this movie I think is a positive, leaving aside the fact that this is a reboot, which I dislike. But here we kind of get a new origin story for Peter Parker, and we retread a lot of the same stuff. But I do really like a few things. I really like how Oscorp, the company, is sort of central to everything. Gwen Stacy has a job there. Kurt Connors, played by Rhys Ifans, works there, and he used to work with Peter Parker's father, who used to work at Oscorp himself. You kind of know that there's a Norman Osborn, but they don't show him in this movie because it's not about him, and I think that was kind of wise. And then even how the spider that bites Peter comes from Oscorp, and they're working on cross-species genetics and spider-human DNA stuff. I think it all just kind of works. Even Peter getting the idea for the web fluid from Oscorp and using that into his own web shooters, which he designs. I don't think that's that critical to the character, to be honest. I thought it was fine that in the Tobey Maguire version, he had organic webbing that was just part of his powers. But here they stuck true to the comics and he makes his own web shooters. And I thought that was cool that Oscorp was incorporated in there. And then I think the backstory of Peter's parents having some things to do that he's got to unravel, and he kind of builds on that and builds some mystery. There is some of that in the comics that has been explored over the years, but I thought it was unique enough to include in The Amazing Spider-Man to set apart this version compared to what we've already seen previously. So I think it was a pretty interesting plot of a movie, and I do like the villain of the Lizard, who's a classic from the comics, and I think they gave him a reason to be there. And as I said before, the cross-species genetics things from lizards and reptiles, and how Peter's dad and Kurt Connors were working on kind of spider type stuff, I think it makes sense. It's all within a theme. So then this villain has an origin with Peter and a tie-in with Peter that then makes it more interesting as they come into conflict with one another. So I thought the overall plot was very strong here. And the visual effects were very strong. I don't love the design of the lizard. His face looks very flat, and I think they were trying to do some performance capture type stuff, and so he's trying to look human. And I think I would have preferred if he were just more reptilian. But other than his face, I think the way that the lizard looks, where he wears his little white lab coat and sometimes just doesn't, and he's a big Godzilla type thing, I think looks really great. And the web swinging, as I mentioned before, looks believable. The cityscapes and all the things that they're doing as Peter flies through the city, I think it looks really great for 2012. So the visual effects are another positive. Now for negatives, the fact that this movie is a reboot, I think is a very big negative. And it's not this movie's fault. It's kind of the movie making universe meta outside of this movie. So if I separate that out, the movie does stand better on its own. But here we have a reboot just a few years after we had had a pretty thorough and effective and well-received origin story for Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And then it gets rebooted just because of office studio politics. And I think that's a big downer. And then they don't want to give the line, with great power there must also come great responsibility. So then they have Martin Sheen's Uncle Ben say this weird backwards phrase that kind of means the same thing. And it feels inauthentic and pulls you out, for me, pulls you out of the movie, because you know that they're just trying to avoid saying the thing, even though they're still trying to say the thing. Sally Field is a pretty good Aunt May. Um, and so, but just bringing back all these characters and setting up this universe that we know so well, Peter learning his powers in a lot of the same way. And then he is swinging through chains in a warehouse, which is an awkward scene. And he's a skater boy, which also doesn't really fit with the character. It just rebooting this character in this movie just feels really unfulfilling. If you take that out of it, let's say that the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy didn't exist, I think this movie stands on its own stronger in if that were the scenario. And it's actually a pretty solid Spider-Man movie if you take that out of it. But just in the context of knowing this is a reboot, it kind of grates me the wrong way, so I've got to put that as a negative. And then the score for this movie by James Horner isn't bad, but I thought the score in Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, and Spider-Man 3 were all very strong by Danny Elfman and then contributed to by another composer. So then here, by contrast, this one just didn't stand out to me. And maybe if I spent more time listening to the whole soundtrack by itself, maybe it would grow on me. And I don't have as much nostalgia for this movie as I do for the other Spider-Man movies. So all of that considered, that's why I think this score is not as strong. But I'd consider that a negative just because it doesn't stand on its own or hold up as well compared to the other scores. And then as I've been doing, we're looking at the Spider-Man suits across these movies. Here, Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man has his own suit, and it's terrible. It's absolutely horrible. It has the texture of a basketball. It's too dark. There's too many lines in it. The lenses are the wrong shape and they're yellow. It seems like a motorcycle helmet at times. I like that there are web shooters that he builds and attaches to them, and he has to refill the web fluid. I like that because that's an homage to the comics, but as I mentioned before, I don't think it's necessary. But the shoe part looks weird, and the arms look weird, and the design looks weird, and the silhouette looks weird. It's just a very terrible suit. And I know it's just a red and blue spandex costume, but I just think this one's terrible. Now, how might The Amazing Spider-Man connect to Spider-Man Brand New Day? So none of the actors in The Amazing Spider-Man are confirmed for the cast list for Brand New Day, so I don't expect to see anybody directly in that movie. We do see Andrew Garfield and Rhys Ifans return into the MCU in Spider-Man No Way Home as Spider-Man and the Lizard, respectively. So we do see them come up. There's some speculation maybe that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire may return in Avengers Secret Wars. I doubt that, and I don't think they'll be in Doomsday. But once we see Doomsday, we'll have a sense of what may happen in Secret Wars, so we'll have a better prediction there. But I don't think they'll be in either of those, and I don't think there's any direct connection between this movie and Spider-Man Brand New Day. Now, how might The Amazing Spider-Man connect to Avengers Doomsday? None of the actors from The Amazing Spider-Man are part of the cast list for Avengers Doomsday, so I don't expect to see anybody with a significant role. However, Andrew Garfield and Rhys Ifans did come to the MCU in the movie Spider-Man No Way Home, where Andrew Garfield played Spider-Man again, and Rhys Ifans came back to play the Lizard. So they were part of it there, but then they went back to their own universes. I don't expect either of them to come back in Avengers Doomsday. There are some people who think that Avengers Secret Wars is going to bring back lots of Marvel characters, including Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. I think until we see Avengers Doomsday and we know what that movie is about, it's hard to make any predictions about Secret Wars. So at this point, I don't think that we'll see Andrew Garfield in Secret Wars, but I suppose we never know. I don't think we'll see him in Doomsday either. So that's my review of The Amazing Spider-Man. What do you think of this movie, and how do you think it may connect to Spider-Man Brand New Day or Avengers Doomsday? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Follow Movie Marathons HQ on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and also on Letterboxd, where you can see all of the movie marathons we are doing and we have done before. The next movie in this marathon is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. See you at the movies!